Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. In this video tutorial we are going to take a look at using the pen tool here in Adobe Illustrator. We're using Adobe Illustrator CS2 today. Now the pen tool is the granddaddy of all of these vector tools. In Photoshop it's a vector tool. Here in Illustrator it is most certainly a vector tool, and it is your ticket to drawing virtually anything in vector. If you know how to use a pen tool, you can do virtually anything as far as drawing is concerned. So it's a very, very, very important tool. When you're going to use Illustrator here, you're going to need to know how to use the pen tool. Alright, now the pen tool is not at all like the brush tool in the way you would draw it. The pen tool is located right over here in the tools palette. I'm going to hit Command or Control Tab to get rid of all these extra palettes here. Or excuse me, that's Shift Tab. The pen tool is located right over here in the tools palette. Hotkey for that is P. Now, if you have used the paint brush, you know that you can just simply draw across the screen and you get strokes. Well, the pen tool is not like that at all. If you start pulling across the screen, you get these weird things coming out and you start to move your mouse around, and needless to say, it doesn't really look like what you're trying to draw. Okay, so the pen tool is actually much different than the brush tool. Here in Illustrator it does the same thing as the brush tool because both are creating paths. Everything that is vector is based on a path, so it can be scaled unlimited up and down. So that's something to remember. But the pen tool is a very precise way, an extremely precise way of creating paths. So we're going to take a look at how to really use the pen tool, and from the viewpoint of somebody who's never used a pen tool before. And the pen tool is definitely going to become your go-to tool when it comes to drawing precise curves, shapes that consist of both curved lines and straight lines, and all sorts of little things. You can find you're going to use the pen tool all the time, so it's very, very, very important that you learn how to use it. Now, the pen tool creates everything, as I mentioned just a second ago, in the path format. Everything is a path, and using the pen tool, it's basically like a connect the dots tool. You can think of it like that. You draw a dot with the pen, you click to draw a second dot, and Illustrator makes a line in between the two. Okay? And it's how you change these dots or make changes to these dots that affects the line in between. And we're going to take a look at how we can make changes to these dots, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about in just a minute. Alright, now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little bit better. One other thing you're going to notice when you use the pen tool is when you pull the pen tool out, and I'm sure you cannot see it on this video recording, the video is much too small, but if you're following along, you'll notice the pen tool has a little X next to it. And that little X is basically Illustrator telling you that if you start drawing right now, you're going to create a new path. So I'm going to just create a rough triangle. Now, when you come to close off your path, it's called closing the path. When you join your open endpoints, you join them to make one continuous path here. I'm about to make one continuous path, excuse me. And when you do that, the pen tool, a different little icon thing pops up next to it, and this is a little circle. Okay, and that's Illustrator telling you that when you press, you're going to close your path off and make this one continuous path. Now, one other thing you're going to notice is when you move over any part of the path, for instance here, I get a plus next to the pen. That's telling me that if I click, I can add another anchor point. And anchor points are going to be your editing points. The changes you make at your anchor points are going to affect the rest of the path. And I'll show you exactly what I mean in just a second. Let's move the pen over an existing anchor point. Now we get a minus next to the pen. When I press, Illustrator deletes that anchor point, and you can see what happened. Illustrator automatically updated our shape here and made sure that we had a joined path just like we did when we had a wider triangle. Alright, so you can see that it's going to continuously update our shape here as we make these changes using the pen tool. So those are a couple of the things that you're going to need to know. One other thing is, I'm just going to draw a new path here. Let's say I start drawing that path and then I hit V, which is my selection tool hotkey, and I deselect it, and I come back 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a day, a week, whatever later. I come back later and I realize that I want to continue that path. I can do that. grab the pen tool again and move it over one of these anchor points, and you're going to see that a slash is going to appear next to this anchor point. When I press that, it's going to select that anchor point, and I can continue drawing off that path. Now, you just saw me making a bunch of curves and things like that. I'm just going to delete these shapes here. We're going to draw new shapes in just a second. But you just saw me making some curves with the pen tool, and all of that kind of stuff we're going to cover in this tutorial. And by the end of this tutorial, you're going to know how to do all of that. So you're going to be ready to go when it comes to using the pen tool here in a matter of minutes. Okay, we're going to use the pen tool here in conjunction with the direct selection tool. The hotkey for the direct selection tool is A, and the direct selection tool here in the toolbar is this white mouse right here. Now, the direct selection tool is a bit different than the regular selection tool in the fact that the regular selection tool selects things on your Illustrator artboard by object. It selects whole objects. The direct selection tool, excuse me, not the direction selection tool. The direct selection tool selects things based on the sub-object if you have a group of objects, or in the case of paths, you can select individual anchor points to edit them, or individual line segments of edited line, or just straight segments of line. And again, you probably don't understand what I'm saying, but you will in just a minute. I just want to throw it out there. All right, let's draw a shape. We're going to come over here in the Tools palette, and right off the bat, get rid of your fill, and we're going to replace the fill with a light gray. Hit OK, and just leave your stroke as black. Get rid of my color palette. Now, grab the pen tool, and we're going to draw a box here. Now, one cool thing about the pen tool is I just clicked once to create my first anchor point. You can hold the Shift key, and that will allow you to create a perfectly straight horizontal line. So the pen tool, when you're drawing with paths, you can think of it in the same way as a lot of other tools. If you use Photoshop, if you use transformation tools here in Illustrator, transformation tools in Photoshop, when you hold Shift, you constrain Illustrator, Photoshop to straight up and down lines, or straight across horizontal lines, or 45-degree increments. Okay, so you're constraining Illustrator to these 45-degree increments, which in this case is a line straight across, but if I hold Shift, for example, and press down here, it's going to make a 45-degree angle down. Alright, but I don't want to do that. I want to make a box. So I'm going to click Shift, click down here. I'm just holding Shift down now, and I'm just clicking, and then I'm going to hit Shift and close my path off, and obviously there it's not a perfectly straight line because I didn't quite get it exactly where I needed it to be down here at the bottom, this anchor point, that is. Don't worry about that though. I just want a square, and you can see that we now have this gray square with a black stroke. So let's make a couple changes to this. We're going to grab the pen tool, and we're going to add a few anchor points. Right here on the side, I'm going to add an anchor point. Now notice this. I am over my path, but my pen tool still has that X next to it, which means I'm going to start a new path. Okay? You can see I'm drawing a new path. I don't want that. There is a tool here in Illustrator that allows you to add anchor points once you have deselected the path, and that is the Add Anchor Point and Delete Anchor Point tools. These are basically just the pen tool. Just they call them the Add and Delete Anchor Point tools. These, I can just click any path I want, and now I've added an anchor point to it. Now, the reason I don't like using those tools is because if you have many paths in one area, you can very easily start adding anchor points to paths you don't want to edit. So I don't really recommend you use those tools. What I do recommend you do is hit the V, the hotkey V, for your selection tool, and select that path. Now grab the regular pen tool, and when you move over a path, you're going to see that plus comes up, and we can just quickly add a couple anchor points. So I've just added a couple anchor points, and now I mentioned a second ago we're going to use the direct selection tool, hotkey A, direct selection tool. Now I'm just going to draw out a selection with the direct selection tool. You can see I can pull out a selection just like as if I'm using any other selection tool, and I'm just going to move it over this anchor point here in the center middle side of the box. Okay, it's the left-hand side of the box. Now, with my arrow keys, and I'm holding Shift down, I'm just going to move this anchor point in a couple clicks, just like that. All right, I'm going to grab the anchor point on the other side, and holding down Shift and hitting my left arrow key, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, as I get closer, I can see they don't quite line up, so I'm just going to use my up arrow key to nudge it up a little bit. Okay, you can also just grab these anchor points and move them around. I'm just clicking and dragging here. All right, but I'm just letting you know that you can use your arrow keys or click and drag with the mouse. Okay, so again, I'm going to hit V to get my regular selection tool. I'm going to select this sort of strange shape we have made. I'm going to hit the P hotkey, and that is my pen tool. I'm going to move over one of these anchor points that I just created, and the minus comes up, and notice again when I subtract it, it just, Illustrator gets rid of the anchor point and bumps out and reconnects the dots, if you would, here, and refills the shape and readjusts the entire shape based on that one change I just made. I'm going to undo that though because I want to keep these anchor points in here. Alright, so now you know how to create straight lines with the pen tool. You know how to move points around, and you know how to add and subtract anchor points, and more importantly, you know that anchor points are the editable portions of your line. Where you have anchor points, you can edit that line very easily. Okay, so let's take a look at editing, your lines here. We are going to curve our lines because part of the advantage of using the pen tool is its ability to create precise curves. So click and hold on the pen tool, and you get this little flyout menu, and all the way to the far right there's the Convert Anchor Point tool. Now this tool, when you click and hold it over one of these anchor points, it converts that anchor point from a pointed anchor point to a curved anchor point. So I'm going to do that here. I'm going to click and hold this point off to the right, and I'm just pulling straight down. Matter of fact, I'm going to hold Shift just to make sure I keep myself straight. And you can see an outline of your path showing up. When I let go with the mouse, you can see I now have that line curved, and it's a perfectly curved line. That is what's called a smooth anchor point, because the line just goes right through it nice and smoothly. There is a different kind of curved anchor point that's a not so smooth anchor point. We're going to take a look at them in a minute. But you can see that we have our first curved anchor point. Now, if I recall correctly, I just pulled down on this anchor point. So I'm going to come over to this anchor point, and I'm going to pull down on that as well. Make sure you click the anchor point. There we go. Now, notice something radically different happens on this side. We pulled down just like we did on the other side, but instead of getting a nice curve, we got this loop and not really a curve. What's happening here is Illustrator has drawn all of your paths, and each anchor point affects the anchor point before it and after it. These handles coming out of this anchor point that we pulled out are called tangent handles, and these affect the line in between this anchor point and this anchor point. For example, this tangent handle coming out of the top is affecting this portion of the line, okay? The portion of the line coming up from the bottom. And it's telling the line to come up toward the very top of that tangent handle and then come back down to the point. Now, the way you can remember and not make that mistake is always do all of your pulling with the Convert Anchor Point tool in the same direction. And what I mean by that is, imagine this is a clock. We're going to deal with counterclockwise and clockwise direction here. I just pulled down on this anchor point, so we need to pull counterclockwise. So if I pull down on this anchor point, I'm pulling counterclockwise. I don't want to do that. That's why I'm getting the loop. So I need to pull up on this side. Okay, I'm holding Shift. I just pull up, and you can see I get a nice curve. So you need to keep all of your pulling with this Convert Anchor Point tool going in the same direction. If you're going counterclockwise, all of it's got to go counterclockwise if you want to get the same shape. Now, if you want the loop, that's a different story. But if you want to keep these smooth lines like this, you need to keep all of your pulling in the same direction. Okay? That's the solution if you run into that sort of problem, because if you run into that sort of problem, it could be quite puzzling for you. Now, one of the beauties of using paths in general is their ease of being edited. Okay? They're very, very editable, and that is one huge advantage to using them. You can go back later on very easily and edit them in a various ways. One way that we can come back and edit our paths is, well, the way I should say we can come back and edit our paths later on is using these tangent handles that I mentioned just a minute ago. These tangent handles are what control the amount of curving, or where the curve goes between any two anchor points. So depending on what we do with these tangent handles, that's going to depend on what our curve does. Alright, another thing, this Convert Anchor Point tool, it does just what its name tells you it does. It converts anchor points from curved anchor points back to pointed anchor points. So say we created this curve and we don't like it, we can just click that anchor point once and it goes back to being straight. It's converted from a curved anchor point back to a pointed anchor point. I want to keep it curved. So I'm just going to hit Command or Control Z, and I just undid it. All right. Now, one thing we are going to look at here is, let's just deselect this path. And let's say we come back later and we want to edit it. That's fine. We'll select it, grab the Convert Anchor Point tool, and let's click and start with this anchor point here. The problem is that it's going to undo any curve we have on it and make us redo that curve, and we're kind of limited as far as what we can do here with our curves. So the way we can change that is by using the Direct Selection tool. Once again, you're going to find yourself using this Direct Selection tool quite a bit here when you're working with paths. The Direct Selection tool, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, allows you to select not just the object, but an individual portion of the path. You can see I've only selected between this center anchor point and the anchor point up here in the top left corner. And the only tangent handle that shows up is this red one right here. And I can grab that tangent handle, and now you can see I'm editing that entire curve. Now, I did only have that side of that anchor point selected. The reason that it's editing the bottom as well as the top here when I move that tangent handle is because this is a smooth anchor point. So Illustrator is forcing that line to stay smooth as it goes through that anchor point. I can change that though. I can only edit one side of this anchor point by holding down the Alt key and clicking and dragging. And you can see that I've only edited one side of it. One other way you can only edit one side of it is with the Convert Anchor Point tool. When you have the tangent handles up there, you can just grab it with the Convert Anchor Point tool, and you don't have to click Alt or Option. And that only edits the one side of it as well. So there are a couple ways you can edit these tangent handles as well. And the tangent handles are really what are going to determine the angle and curve and all of that of your path. I'm going to quickly draw another shape here. With the pen tool, I'm going to draw a triangle here. Just like that. And I'm going to grab the Convert Anchor Point tool. I'm going to grab this anchor point here. And basically what I want is I want this top to come down, and I want all the sides to be rounded or rounding in. Just like that. Now the problem is here, the bottom loops around. It doesn't have these pointed edges. So obviously I want to change that. Well, with this Convert Anchor Point tool, I can just grab that side, and I'm just going to move my tangent handle up to mimic the tangent handle above it. You're going to see when I grab this tangent handle, this other tangent handle here above it appears. I'm just going to move it in and mimic that just like that. And you can see we have these pointed curved anchor points, if that makes any sense. They're curves going to a point and then curving out of that point. Now, the way the Direct Selection tool, if you remember over here, the Direct Selection tool, when we edit a smooth anchor point, it forces you to move both sides because it's a smooth anchor point. But now we're talking about curved, or yeah, pointed curved anchor points. That's how you say it. So the Direct Selection tool is going to handle these slightly differently. When I grab one of these tangent handles, you're going to see Illustrator knows it doesn't have to stay smooth at the point. So it's going to allow me to just edit one tangent handle at a time. So that's very nice. That's just something you want to keep in mind. When you've got the smooth anchor points, you're going to be editing both sides unless you hold the Alt key. Alright? So that is the basics of editing your paths with the pen tool and creating curves into your paths, or placing curves, I should say, in your paths using the pen tool. Now, that's not really the easiest way to draw your paths. That's just the easiest way to explain how to draw your paths, which is why I started that way. There is a much, much easier way to actually draw your paths, and it's just using the pen tool. Now, the reason I showed you that way is so you would know how to go back into your paths later on, and edit them. You know how to tweak them. You know you're going to know how to pull tangent handles and what tangent handles are going to do when you pull a smooth or a pointed anchor point and all of that stuff. But let's look here at tracing this image of this guitar. I'm going to raise the opacity in just a second and look at really how you're going to use the pen tool when you get out there on your own and start drawing stuff. So Shift Tab to bring up our palettes. going to my layers palette here. I'm just unlocking the layer. I'm just double clicking it. And in here in the layer options, I have this dim option set to dim the image to 25% opacity, that is. And there we go. We're back to regular opacity. One of the things I like to do when I trace an image is just lock that layer. It tends to keep the layer still. Coming up here to the shape layer, I'm just going to hit Shift Tab to hide all of my layers again. Alright, now we're going to start tracing this guitar, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the pen tool, obviously, and I'm going to place an anchor point right here, right where I have a curve, or right at the bottom of this curve here at the top of this guitar. And before just placing the point, I'm going to click and drag. You remember at the very beginning of this tutorial I told you about clicking and dragging and how it really doesn't do what it looks like it should do. But in this case, clicking and dragging is going to be a very good thing for us. We're going to click and drag out a tangent handle. We're going to drag it about 1/3 of the way up this incline that we're about to go up. Okay, so what we've done is we've created an anchor point that's going to affect the line that isn't even there yet. But now we're going to draw the line. I'm going to place an anchor point right up here, just past the very top of this curve, and I'm going to pull it and create the curve just like that. I'm going to get rid of my fill, so we don't have our fill here. And one other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hit Shift Tab. I'm going to double click into this layer, and I'm going to change the layer color to light blue to make it a little bit easier to see on the white and the background. So what I'm doing is I'm just clicking and dragging as I go. Let me just give you a quick, easy example. Whoops. I'm going to deselect that path. I'm going to click it. An anchor point there, and I'm going to click another anchor point over here, but before I let go, I'm going to hold and I'm just going to pull. And you can see as I pull out on this tangent handle, I create a curve. That's exactly what we're doing here with our path here. So I'm going to select this path again, grab my pen tool, select the last path we were working with. Now we're coming up around another curve here, and we have this tangent handle sticking out. If I just click right here with the curve, our line curves around much tighter. You can't really see it there in this recording, but my line is definitely not going where I want it to go. The way you can change the way your line comes out of an anchor point that has already got tangent handle sticking out of it is holding the Alt key, and I'm just in the pen tool, not switching tools, and you get the Convert Anchor Point tool. And this is going to take a little bit of practice for you to know exactly, number one, where you're going to place your anchor points, but also where to drag these tangent handles. In general, you want to drag the tangent handle in the basic direction that your line is going. Okay, so I'm coming up around this curve, so I'm just dragging it out to the curve. And you usually want to drag it about 1/3 of the way to wherever your next anchor point is going to be. That's usually, I found, that's about the right position. But again, it's just going to take time. You're going to have to work with the pen tool, and that's one of the things that you're just going to get better with practice. You're going to get a feel for the pen tool. So I'm going to now pull out a point, and I need to go back and edit this tangent handle. I'm going to zoom in real close here. What I have here is this line is, you can see it's not curved. It's kind of bent a little bit. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm just going to grab that tangent handle, and I'm just going to move that line out just like that. I'm going to grab Alt and grab this tangent handle and just move it in a little bit. So now we're following the contour of that top part of the guitar much more nicely. Drag a new tangent handle out of this anchor point right to about there, and I'm going to click to here, draw that line. You can also just hit Alt, hold Alt, and click your anchor point to just pull the tangent handle right in and start with no tangent handle, which I just did there. And I'm going to do it again here because I'm just going for a straight line. See, if I left that tangent handle out and it was like angled up, and I try to draw a straight line right up the neck of the guitar, you're going to see it curves it because this tangent handle is affecting the line. So I just need to grab that tangent handle and pull it right back in, all the way into that anchor point. So there we go. We've got a straight line coming up the guitar. We're going to angle it right up and around there. I'm going to hit Alt to pull that tangent handle in. And by the way, when you hit Alt, when you press a anchor point with a pen tool, all you're doing is pulling in the side of the tangent handle that's about to affect the line you're about to draw. So you see, I still have the curve back here, but I just created the straight line because I hit Alt and pulled that tangent handle back in. Right there. Come around that curve. I'm going to hold Alt, edit this tangent handle, pull it up and around, Edit that tangent handle a second time. Alright, and every time you go back and edit one of those tangent handles, you have to make sure that you select your last anchor point again with the pen tool. Otherwise, Illustrator will start drawing a new path, and you definitely don't want that. Alright, so again, I'm going to hit Alt to pull in. Whoops. If I can find the anchor point, I'm going to hit Alt to pull in the tangent handle for this straight line here. And I'm just going to shoot right down the neck. And we'll just continue to curve our way around until we finish the guitar. Okay, so I just drew around the rest of the guitar body. Now, one last thing I want to point out here about the pen tool is when you go to join ends of your path, you remember when we started this path, we clicked and held and dragged out tangent handles, and then we drew a line. So we had an already curved line. We didn't even need to put tangent handles up here. Well, we did because we wanted to edit the path further, but we would have had a curved line regardless because we had pulled tangent handles out of our first anchor point. That's going to pose a little bit of a problem here as we come to connect the ends of our path, because what's going to happen is Illustrator is going to want to use the tangent handle sticking out of the end of this path to edit the path that's coming into it. Now, the way you avoid that is you hold the Alt key and you click to join your path, and then the only side of the path that you edit is the path that you just drew, just like that. Okay? So that's it. That's pretty much everything you need to know about using the pen tool and getting started with the pen tool. It's actually pretty tricky to explain it here, I'm finding out as I'm explaining it. And I hope that you understand what I'm trying to convey to you here through this video, and I hope you have learned something or a few things here about the pen tool, and I certainly hope that you can go out there and use the pen tool now effectively, and you'll know how to use it, and you'll know what to do when you run into certain situations. And again, as far as tracing photos, tracing objects like this, it's just going to be a matter of time before you find out exactly where to place your anchor points. But practice, 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 and keep it up, and soon you'll be able to trace, draw, do anything you want here in Illustrator. And learning a pen tool is certainly a huge step toward mastering Adobe Illustrator. So I hope you've learned something, as I mentioned a second ago, and thank you very much for watching. Please go check out the site that provides these video tutorials. That is www.tutvid.com, tutvid.com. Thank you for watching.